What if the rules of money, the rules that decide who gets rich and who stays broke, were written 300 years ago and never changed? What if everything from your rent to your paycheck, your student loans to your retirement fund, was still being dictated by a set of invisible money laws older than the United States itself? What if the system wasn't broken, but built this way? Every time the cost of living jumps, every time your savings buy less, every time your wages stagnate while billionaires add another zero to their net worth, you're feeling the echo of those 300-year-old money laws. Hey, before we dive in, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I want to know how this system looks from your corner of the world. And if you're tired of hearing the same recycled stories about market cycles and temporary inflation, hit subscribe right now, because here, you get the unfiltered truth. Because the truth is this: the rich don't pay for inflation, you do. And that's not an accident, that's the design. Let's rewind to Paris, 1716. A Scottish gambler named John Law convinced the French monarchy that he could fix the kingdom's crushing debt. His idea? Replace hard metal coins with paper promises. He opened Banque Générale, the first true central bank of Europe, and started printing money backed by land and speculation. Within 4 years, France was booming. Everyone felt rich. But here's the twist: the wealth wasn't real. The paper money Law created was flowing first to his friends, aristocrats, and investors. They used it to buy real land, real gold, real assets. By the time it reached the average citizen, prices had already soared. The early recipients got rich. The late ones got wrecked. Sound familiar? That was the birth of the Cantillon effect, a 300-year-old law of money that still decides who wins and who loses every time a government prints its way out of crisis. When the bubble popped in 1720, France collapsed. Prices exploded. Confidence vanished. People who thought they were rich one day were begging the next. Sound familiar? Now fast forward 250 years to America, 1971. President Nixon ends the gold standard. The dollar is no longer tied to anything tangible. Money becomes purely faith-based, fiat. From that day on, the United States became the world's biggest experiment in John Law's old dream: infinite paper wealth. And just like 1716 Paris, the first ones to get that new money weren't factory workers or teachers. They were bankers, asset managers, and corporations. Sound familiar yet? In 2008, Wall Street's mortgage bubble burst, and the Federal Reserve stepped in with a rescue plan called quantitative easing. Trillions of dollars appeared out of thin air. But that money didn't rebuild neighborhoods. It didn't erase student debt. It didn't raise wages. It went straight into the stock market, the bond market, and corporate buybacks. Result? Asset prices soared. Housing costs doubled. Wages barely moved. The top 1% regained every dollar they lost within 2 years, while millions of Americans never recovered. Sound familiar? That's not new. That's not random. That's the same 300-year-old mechanism, re-engineered with digital precision. You see, John Law's paper notes became the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. The aristocrats of Versailles became the boardrooms of Wall Street, and the peasants of 1720? Today, they're the middle class. Because when new money enters the system, it doesn't trickle down. It trickles up. Every bailout, every stimulus, every rate cut. The same script plays out. Insiders get access first. They buy scarce assets. Prices rise for everyone else. You pay the bill through inflation. That's the loop. And that loop, that quiet, invisible pipeline of wealth from the many to the few, is the single most powerful machine ever built. The modern name? You know it. The Federal Reserve System. The global central bank network. But beneath it lies the same philosophy John Law invented 3 centuries ago, and the same moral hazard that never died. Because here's the twist. It is not how much money is printed that decides who wins. It's where it enters first. That simple principle decides whether you become wealthy or just another name on a balance sheet. And the institution that perfected that trick? You won't believe the name. The receipt is wilder than you think. Remember what we said. It's not how much money is created. It's where it enters first. That is the unspoken law. the invisible gatekeeping system that has ruled money since John Law's time. And today, it runs through one name every American knows, but almost nobody understands: the Federal Reserve. That's the institution that quietly perfected John Law's 300-year-old game. Only now it's digital, global, and turbocharged by algorithms. Here's how the modern version works. The Fed doesn't actually print paper money. It creates reserves, numbers on a balance sheet, that enter the financial system through the top tier: major banks, investment houses, and government securities dealers. Those players then lend, speculate, and leverage that cheap credit into the markets. They buy stocks, bonds, real estate, crypto, anything scarce enough to rise when money floods in. Prices jump, asset values explode. And if you already own assets, congratulations, you just got richer. If you don't, you just got priced out. That's the asset inflation loop. Money creation at the top, asset prices rise, collateral values climb, more borrowing, even more money creation. The official story says it stimulates the economy. The truth? It stimulates inequality. Picture a fountain. Water pours in at the top, clean, fresh, powerful. By the time it trickles down to the lower tiers, it's only a few drops, already muddy. That's the money system. Fresh credit flows first to the financial elite, then trickles down to wages and prices much later, if at all. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after an Irish economist who watched John Law's bubble destroy Paris 3 centuries ago. He noticed that where new money enters determines who benefits and who bleeds. 300 years later, that rule still explains the gap between Wall Street and Main Street. Let's break down just how extreme the loop has become. In 2008, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was under $1 trillion. By 2022, it hit $9 trillion. That's a 900% increase in just 14 years. The top 10% of Americans now own over 89% of all U.S. stocks and mutual funds. Since 2020, U.S. home prices have risen over 40%, while median wages grew less than 12%. The top 1% captured 2/3 of all new wealth created during the pandemic. And since 1971, the year the dollar left gold, the dollar has lost over 85% of its purchasing power. Numbers don't lie. The machine rewards those closest to the faucet. Everyone else gets the inflation. Now you might think, well, fine, that's capitalism, right? Not quite, because capitalism assumes risk and reward are balanced. But in this system, the reward stays private, the risk gets socialized. When markets crash like 2008 or 2020, what happens? The same people who made billions on the way up get rescued on the way down. Banks too big to fail? Saved. Corporations drowning in debt? Bailed out. Ordinary people? Foreclosed, laid off, and told to tighten your belts. That's not capitalism. That's moral hazard on a global scale. Because the loop teaches the powerful one lesson: you will never pay the full price of your own gamble. Someone else, taxpayers, savers, future generations will. Think back to 2020. The economy shut down. Millions unemployed. And yet the stock market hit record highs. How? Because the Fed unleashed $5 trillion in liquidity within months. Corporations used it for buybacks. Hedge funds front-ran the rebound. Meanwhile, small businesses folded by the thousands. It was John Law's playbook rewritten in binary code. The first receivers, banks, funds, asset managers, bought everything in sight. You, watching from home, got stimulus checks that evaporated into rent and groceries inflated by the same liquidity. That's the cruel irony. The money that is supposed to help you is the same money that raises your cost of living. But the Fed isn't alone. There's another layer, the shadow banking system. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's the real plumbing of modern finance. Shadow banks aren't traditional banks with branches. They're hedge funds, money market funds, repo dealers, private equity giants, entities that move trillions in overnight credit outside the reach of regulation. They create synthetic money through collateralized lending, repurchase agreements, and derivatives. Think of it as a parallel dollar universe, off the books but just as powerful. When the Fed pumps reserves into the system, shadow banks amplify it 10x through leverage. That's why asset prices can skyrocket long before wages budge. When the loop breaks, liquidity vanishes overnight, just like John Law's paper money did in 1720. Only this time it's global and digital. Imagine playing Monopoly, but half the players have invisible money you can't see. They're buying up properties with chips that look like credit but are actually IOUs on IOUs. That's the shadow system. It's invisible until it collapses. Then suddenly, you're told your savings are at risk, your bank needs a bailout, your dollar buys less. And the same people who built the ghost market, they're already preparing their next move. Behind every chart there's a person, a nurse whose paycheck can't cover rent, a young couple priced out of their first home, a retiree watching their savings melt in slow motion. These aren't side effects, they're outcomes, designed by the same financial architecture that has been optimized for 3 centuries to transfer risk downward and wealth upward. When John Law's system exploded, the French people paid with their livelihoods. When 2008 exploded, Americans paid with their homes. When the next one hits, it'll be global. Because the loop is now everywhere. From the Fed to the ECB, from Tokyo to Zurich, every central bank is running the same script. And that brings us to the most dangerous part of all. See, every bubble, every single one, has ended the same way. The elite exit first. The public holds the bag. But this time, the mechanism that decides who gets out and who gets trapped is evolving into something new. Digital currencies, programmable money, central bank control at the code level. If the last 300 years decided who gets rich, the next 30 might decide who stays free. And when you see where this road leads, you'll realize the next crash isn't the end, it's the upgrade. Stay tuned, because Part 3 reveals how the next version of this 300-year-old system could rewrite wealth, privacy, and power itself. Every empire that mastered the money machine thought it would last forever. France thought so in 1720. Britain thought so in 1914. America thinks so now. But the laws of money don't bend for belief. They repeat. And right now, we're repeating them. Faster than ever. Here's the twist nobody in power wants you to think about. The next evolution of this 300-year-old system isn't about paper or even banks. It's about code. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are coming. They're being tested from China to Europe to the United States. On paper, they promise efficiency, safety, modernization. But underneath, they represent total control. Because when money becomes code, whoever writes that code can decide where it moves, how it's spent, and who gets access. Imagine this. The same people who control money creation now control permission. If your dollar isn't just digital but programmable, the system could freeze it, limit it, or expire it. That's not financial innovation. That's digital feudalism. The old elites used paper promises. The new elites use algorithms. 300 years ago, John Law sold France a dream. Print money, get rich. It ended in collapse, chaos, and famine. 50 years ago, Nixon promised prosperity after cutting gold from the dollar. It ended with inflation, debt, and a shrinking middle class. 15 years ago, central banks promised to stabilize the economy. It ended with the biggest wealth transfer in modern history. Now we're told programmable money will empower us. Sound familiar? Because every stage of this machine has sold the same lie, that more control means more stability. But the truth is simpler. Control consolidates power, and power always protects itself. As of this year, global debt has surpassed $350 trillion. U.S. government debt alone crossed $34 trillion. That's over $100,000 per citizen, and growing every second. Central banks can't stop printing without imploding the system. They can't raise rates forever without crushing borrowers. They're trapped. So they do what John Law did. Create more paper, or in this case, more pixels. And while they save the system, they sacrifice your savings. That's the dirty secret of the 300-year-old money laws. Inflation isn't a bug, it's the harvest. It's how the system feeds. When your paycheck buys less, when your rent doubles, when your savings quietly die, that's not bad luck. That's wealth extraction, mathematically engineered. Every generation thinks it's smarter than the last. But money isn't about intelligence. It's about design. And the design hasn't changed since the 1700s. Those closest to the source of new money grow wealthier. Those farthest away chase shadows. That's why the middle class keeps shrinking. Why 2 generations work harder for less security. Why owning nothing and being happy suddenly sounds like prophecy. The danger isn't just economic collapse, it's complacency. The belief that someone else will fix it. That this time the system will self-correct. But the system can't correct what it was never built to balance. The next crash won't look like 2008. It'll be faster, deeper, and global. Because now the system is fully digital, and contagion travels at the speed of code. When liquidity vanishes, when assets implode, when confidence collapses, there won't be time for paper bailouts. There'll be switches flipped, accounts frozen, rules rewritten overnight, and the same old cycle, engineered collapse, elite rescue, public pain, will replay again. Unless we finally see the design for what it is. Because you can't beat a system you don't understand. And you can't understand it if you still believe it's fair. So here's the real takeaway. These 300-year-old money laws still decide who gets rich. They always have. But awareness is leverage. Every time you learn how the loop works, where money enters, who touches it first, and who pays for it last, you reclaim a little bit of that stolen power. The elites have their algorithms. You have your attention. And that's the one currency they can't print. So, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into how the system really works, hit subscribe, share this video, and keep your eyes open. Because the question isn't just, who gets rich? It's, are we wiser now, or just walking the same path, in better suits?